farming did not just build civilization, it built the first disease trap. The moment humans stopped moving, started storing grain, penned animals close to their homes, and packed more bodies into smaller spaces than nature had ever really intended, disease stopped being a personal problem and became a population problem. A village could now get sick all at once. A city could become its own incubator, and a civilization could spend centuries building walls, roads, and temples only to discover that the real enemy was already inside the water jar. Alright, let's go. Number 10. Worms. This sounds small. It was not. The earliest farmers lived with parasites almost continuously. Roundworms, whipworms, tapeworms, hookworms. Once you have settled life, shared waste, and the same people eating from the same fields year after year, parasites stop being occasional. They become background. They drain calories, weaken children, stunt growth, reduce fertility, and make every famine worse, because the body is already losing nutrients before the hunger even begins. We know this from coprolites preserved human feces and from eggs found in ancient latrines and burials. The oldest cities were full of parasites because the oldest cities had no way to escape themselves. Number 9. Brucellosis. This is one of the first true farming diseases. It comes from animals. Goats, sheep, cattle, the exact animals that made early civilization possible. Humans caught it through milk, blood, birth fluids, and close daily contact, which means the people who benefited most from domestication were also exposing themselves most completely to its consequences. Brucellosis does not always kill fast. It does something more economically destructive. Chronic fever, joint pain, weakness, miscarriages, bone damage. It turns a productive body into a slower one. In early agricultural societies, that was catastrophic. The whole village depended on repetitive labour. One disease that made half your adults weaker for months or years was not just illness. It was a drop in harvest, birth survival, and social resilience. The livestock brought food. They also brought invisible enemies. Number 8. Tuberculosis. This one is older than most people realise. For a long time, tuberculosis was treated like a disease of later urban civilization. But skeletal evidence and ancient dinner now show it was already haunting early human settlements thousands of years before the classical world. Once people started living close together, once smoke-filled indoor spaces, once undernourished bodies began sleeping under the same roof generation after generation, tuberculosis found its perfect human environment. It attacks slowly. The lungs first, then the bones, then the whole body. Spine collapse, chronic cough, fever, wasting. A person doesn't just die of tuberculosis. They disappear over time while everyone around them watches and keeps breathing the same air. And that is why it mattered so much to early civilization. A disease that spreads slowly, hides early, and turns houses into transmission chambers is exactly the kind of disease settled life creates and then struggles to survive. Number 7. Dysentery. The oldest cities had one central design flaw. They were filthy. Not because people were stupid, because dense settlement creates waste faster than early infrastructure can remove it. Once human waste and drinking water begin sharing space, dysentery becomes inevitable. It is one of the oldest urban killers in history, and probably one of the biggest reasons early settlements repeatedly collapsed or shrank before they could stabilize. Dysentery is not glamorous enough to dominate historical memory. It should. It kills by emptying the body. Water out, salts out, strength out, and it kills children fastest. A settlement can survive losing elders. It can survive losing warriors. It cannot survive repeating waves of child death forever without becoming brittle. The walls of early civilization did not keep disease out. They often kept it in. Number 6. Leishmaniasis. This one hid in the skin. Spread by sandflies, leishmaniasis has been identified in ancient remains from the Old World and the Americas. In some forms it ulcerates the skin. In others it attacks internal organs and kills from the inside. It thrives in hot, dry regions with poor housing and lots of exposed bodies, exactly the kind of edge environment where many early farming and proto-urban communities formed. What made it especially destructive was not just mortality. It marked people visibly. Lesions, scars, long-term weakness. It changed marriage prospects, labour capacity, and social role. That matters in a small village. In an early state trying to hold itself together, it matters more. Some diseases kill quickly, others break people publicly. Number 5. Schistosomiasis. This is the irrigation disease. The moment humans began controlling rivers at scale, especially in places like ancient Egypt, they also began standing in parasite-rich freshwater over and over again. Schistosomiasis is caused by parasitic worms that penetrate the skin in contaminated water, then mature inside the body and damage the liver, bladder, intestines, and reproductive system over time. And this is what makes it so vicious historically. The exact innovation that builds civilization irrigation also builds the disease environment. You need canals, flooded fields, and repeated contact with slow-moving water to produce the agricultural surplus the first great states depended on. The parasite needs the same thing. So a civilization can literally engineer the landscape that makes it rich and sick at the same time. That is not a coincidence. It is one of the oldest patterns in human history. Number 4. Malaria. Mosquitoes love standing water. Civilization loves standing water too. Store it. Channel it. Irrigate with it. Flood a field. Slow a river. Keep animals near it. Build near it. All of these are useful decisions if you want crops and permanent settlements. All of them are also invitations to malaria. For early civilizations, malaria was a demographic grinder. It rarely announces itself as a single apocalyptic event. It simply weakens enough people, often enough that the whole population becomes less productive, less fertile, less resilient, and more vulnerable to everything else. Fever, chills, anemia, miscarriage, infant death. Again and again. If you want to understand why some fertile river worlds remained unstable for so long, malaria is part of the answer. The water that fed the fields also fed the vector. Number 3. Smallpox. This one is harder to date cleanly, which makes it more disturbing, not less. The exact prehistoric origins of smallpox are still debated, but all the evidence points in the same direction. Once humans began domesticating animals and living at higher densities, the conditions for a poxvirus with catastrophic mortality were in place. Ancient mummies from Egypt show pox-like lesions. Genetic work suggests the virus is ancient, even if its deadliest historical forms appear later. Why include it here? Because smallpox represents the civilization threshold disease. It is the kind of pathogen that cannot really become what it became until human populations become dense, connected, and immunologically naive at scale. Once that happens, the body count stops looking local and starts looking civilizational. A disease does not need to destroy every person to change history. It only needs to reshape which children reach adulthood. Number 2. Plague. Not the medieval Black Death version first. The older one, ancient dinar recovered from teeth, has shown that Yersinia pestis, the plague bacterium, was already infecting humans around 5,000 years ago. These earliest strains were not identical to the later Black Death lineage. Some may not have spread through fleas yet, but they were there, in human bodies. In the Bronze Age, long before the historical chronicles begin naming plague as a world-ending force. That matters, because it means epidemic collapse was built into settled life far earlier than the texts admit. Trade routes spread goods. They also spread bacteria. The first connected societies were also the first vulnerable societies, and plague-like pathogens were moving through them before they had the language to call the pattern what it was. The deadliest part of civilization may have arrived with civilization itself. And number 1. The real killer was not one disease. It was the package. This is the part people keep missing. No single pathogen had to wipe out an early civilization on its own. It was enough for worms to weaken children, dysentery to empty bodies, brucellosis to break workers, tuberculosis to haunt households, schistosomiasis to poison irrigation cultures, and malaria to keep everyone just weak enough that famine, flood, or war hit harder when they came. The first civilizations did not just build roads and temples and granaries. They built disease ecologies. They made food easier to store and waste harder to escape. They gathered bodies together faster than immunity could adapt. They turned every useful innovation into a possible biological trap. The animals that fed them infected them. The rivers that sustained them sickened them. The walls that protected them concentrated their pathogens. Civilization was not just a triumph over nature, it was a deal. And the price was disease. That is why these societies look so fragile when you zoom in. Not because they were weak, because every day they were balancing food against infection, water against parasites, density against collapse. The first city was not just a breakthrough. It was an experiment in whether enough people could live together without their own biology undoing the project. Sometimes the answer was no, and that is the part of early civilization no one likes to romanticize. The grain stores and the temples survive in the imagination. The fevers usually do not. But the fevers were there first, and for a very long time they were winning.